Are you with us?
Yes, I am. Good evening.
We are recognizing you for a presentation. Please go ahead.
Okay, sounds good. I have a couple PowerPoint slides that I can share if I can do so. It says that it's currently locked from sharing.
Good to go.
Excellent. Okay, you should be able to see my PowerPoint here.
So far, all we're seeing is a word. Jonathan Cameron has started screen sharing, and I don't see anything other than that. There we go.
Okay. Okay, so I'll give just a bit of an overview here. Impact fees there's a separate portion of state statute that deals with impact fees, and they are a one-time fee imposed on new development, and they really are designed to recover the proportionate share of capital costs related to serving that new development. There is a process for completing an impact fee study and for adopting impact fees, and I'll talk about that here in the next few minutes. But in general, what you see on screen is the different types of facilities under state statute that you have the ability to impose impact fees for. In my experience, the most common impact fees that municipalities have are for water, sewer, parks, and the fire, law, and libraries. The others on this list certainly are applicable, but just in my experience, not as common. The flip side of it is you cannot use impact fees for anything not specifically listed in the state statute, which would be for city hall type facility, any facilities owned by school districts, or for non, brick and mortar type facilities, mainly vehicles. And one of the more commonly asked questions we get is, well, what about a fire truck? Because it certainly meets the definition of a capital facility, but it's not an actual, brick and mortar type building. So unfortunately, those would be ineligible under state statutes to collect impact fees for. The other thing that's important to note with impact fees is that once you collect the impact fees, which they're generally payable at the issuance of a building permit, that's when I'd say most municipalities collect them. You do have the option to collect an occupancy as well, but by and large, building permit is when most municipalities can collect them. But you do have time limits to spend the money or have to face a refund situation where you're refunding them back to the property owner that paid them. Generally speaking, you've got 8 years from the time of collection to spend impact fee monies collected for anything except for sewer impact fees. The state statute grants 10 years from the time of collection for sewer impact fees, and this time period can be extended by 3 years due to a hardship type situation, but you would need to the council would need to adopt a resolution kind of specifying the situation and why there was a hardship and those monies weren't spent. And really all that means is money in, money out. So, a lot of times what you'll see a community do is collect impact fees in anticipation of the project. When it comes time to doing the project, they're liquidating their fund and maybe downsizing what they would be borrowing for, do the project, and then annually applying any impact fee money they collect, say in that year or in that previous year, towards the debt service payment. The hard thing with impact fees is because they are payable at the issuance of the building permit, you really don't know exactly how much impact fee revenue you're going to get year over year. So, it does take a little bit of planning from a budget standpoint to know how much you need, you can reasonably expect if you are going to say offset a portion of debt, or if you are going to say we're going to wait, for a period of time until we have within the time period here, but we're going to wait until we have enough money built up in our fund to really do something. It can be a bit difficult year over year to plan for that, particularly as we're coming out of the recession several years ago. That was really a situation where we did see some municipalities adopt these hardship resolutions. In terms of the process, there is what's called the Public Facilities Needs Assessment, which really is the impact fee study itself that has to be prepared prior to the adoption of the fees, and it requires the municipality in that study to take an inventory of existing facilities. So, for example, if you're doing a park impact fee study, you would take an inventory or show an inventory of your existing parks, the facilities at each park, the acreage of the park, the type, is it a community, neighborhood, mini park, etc. You'd have to then identify the new, improved, or expanded costs that you're going to do or recover with impact fees, and then for that cost, using the park example again, we're going to do a new community park, for example, and that park is going to cost $5 million. Of that $5 million, we're going to show in the impact fee study a deficiency growth analysis that really identifies, based on some adopted service level standards, how much of that park is really needed to meet our existing service population, and how much is needed for future population that we're projecting here going outwards. Once you do that and have the impact fee calculated, you then have to demonstrate the effect that the impact fees have on affordable housing. And once that is really done and you've got your impact fee study completed, that study has to be placed on file for a 30-day period in the office of the clerk prior to holding a public hearing on the impact fees and then adopting the impact fee ordinance imposing them. Oftentimes, the public hearing and the actual ordinance adoption happen at the same common council. So just to kind of talk about that process in terms of what it might look like, this example is a park example, but you really have to consider reasonable service level standards when you talk about imposing an impact fee. What I've seen in my experience, and I used to do a lot of impact fee studies prior to coming to Ehlers, and really over the last, I'd say, 2-3 years, as the economy has picked up and as housing has picked up and residential development, we're seeing a lot of communities come back and say, hey, we either want an impact fee or we've done one, we haven't done anything with it for 10 years, so we dust this off and update it. So we've been doing a fair amount of impact fee work over the last couple of years here. But prior to the recession, I spent a good portion of my time doing impact fee studies, and when I review other firms' work that have done these, one of the pitfalls that I would say is, in a lot of cases, you see an impact fee that says, this facility is 100% new growth related. Now, a lot of times when you really get down to the nitty gritty, what you find is that usually is not the case. Usually there is some portion of a new facility that is going to meet an existing, quote unquote, deficiency within whatever it is you're doing. So an example like this with a park facility, what you see with parks is that parks are generally grouped into different types of parks. A neighborhood park, which is a little bit smaller, serving a smaller service area. A community park that benefits the entire city. Larger park or has a recognizable feature associated with it, or a regional type park that might be done by the county or even by the city, but benefit the region as a whole. So in an impact fee study, we're taking an inventory of their existing acreage, We're looking at kind of the service area of the existing parks in terms of total acreage per population, or per thousand of population. So in the case of the neighborhood park, we've got 5 acres based on the population of this community, and this was pulled from another impact fee study that we did. We're looking at about 2 acres per thousand as the service level standard, based on the population at the time. That would suggest we need 22 acres. We only have 5. So we've got a deficiency of about 17 and a half acres. So if the impact fee study says we want 5 new neighborhood parks, the first 17 acres of what we're doing is going to meet that deficiency. Anything in and above it is needing kind of new growth, if that kind of makes sense. So that's kind of a snapshot of the process that we would go through in working with city staff, depending on what sort of impact you might be looking at to identify growth versus deficiency. And it's really important that the impact fee study has that, and it's very transparent and easy to understand, because ultimately it could be a developer or a series of developers that are reviewing that study to say, hey, show me exactly how you're getting to the impact fee calculation, and if I'm not comfortable with it, I might challenge this impact fee. So making sure that that's done through this study is important. The last thing I'll leave with, and then I'll be happy to turn it back over and answer questions. From a practical consideration is really consider the time period between implementation of an impact fee and when the facility will actually be constructed. In a lot of cases, what we see municipalities do, and this is a good thing, is do an impact fee in anticipation of the project actually occurring, to make sure that we're not losing out on revenue if we have development happening. But the bottom line is you don't want to do an impact fee and then never do the project. That is obviously not a good thing, and you'll potentially face a refund situation, or at the very least have to come back to that fee and say, well, we said we were going to do this. Now we're switching gears and doing something different that we can still collect an impact fee for. The other thing that I would say is dealing with communities over the last several years is make sure that you update your impact fee study as conditions change. If you have, say, an update to your comprehensive plan, if we go through another recession, or conversely, if development really starts to kick up, that we're really updating our development projections, because that really becomes the denominator in the impact fee. If you say, back to our park example, we're doing a $5 million park, but $1 million of it is new growth related, and that's what we're going to collect through impact fees. That $1 million is divided by our future growth projections. So if growth is picking up or slowing down, it's important to come back and update those impact fees so they're as accurate as possible for cash flow purposes. The other thing would be project scope changes. Again, a lot of times what we see is this impact fee was done 10, 15 years ago. It's really sat on the shelf. But in the meantime, we did a sewer impact fee, for example, but man, the scope of the project really changed from this original study, and it went up. The cost of it went up quite a bit. Well, really, we should have come back and updated the impact fee once we knew the cost of this project was going to go up significantly. And a lot of times that hasn't happened. So, my kind of words of caution with impact fees is they do have to be actively managed. They can be really a great source of revenue for the community. They really kind of follow the principle of cost causation. Those who cause the cost pay the cost. Development kind of paying its own way into the community, but they do have to be done in a way, in a manner that is really fair and equitable. That it can be easily demonstrated back to somebody who's paying the fee. Okay, I can see exactly what you're doing here. I mean, I like paying extra money, but I get it. Finally, just a word of with water impact fees, water facilities are certainly eligible under state statutes, but for communities that do adopt a water impact fee or have a water impact fee, when you go in for your next conventional rate case, the Public Service Commission, who administers and helps communities adopt new water rates, will definitely request a copy of the impact fee study, and they'll want to know exactly what you're doing with it. So again, kind of an added layer of management for impact fees. So with that, I know it's kind of a quick overview, but I'm happy to answer questions.
Do any of you have questions right now for Mr. Cameron? My question, John, is do we have to have a separate impact fee study for each thing, like one for parks and one for sewer, or can we do one big overall project?
So if you would say, let's do an impact fee for parks and sewer and water, it would be one study document, and in it, the way we do it is we'll have a different chapter. So, the first chapter will kind of show here's our growth projections, residential and non-residential. The next chapter will be park impact fee calculation, and chapter water and sewer. So you do have to have separate calculations, and technically each one is its own study, but it would be all encapsulated in one document.
What does doing this cost the city? What kind of fee is involved?
Sure. So I would say from a budgetary standpoint, between $5,000 and $7,000 per facility. For example, if you say let's do parks, water, sewer, you're looking at roughly $15,000 for all three, or so.
Now, one of the reasons we're looking at this is we feel that our impact fees are kind of outdated, and we're not charging as much as other people. And that was one of the main reasons you say you're doing these days?
Yes, yeah, I think in general what we see is that a lot of communities put impact fees in place prior to the Great Recession. The recession hit, development was scarce, and now things are starting to come back, and either the development community may be questioning it, or from a staff perspective, you're coming back to these studies going, we really haven't touched this in a while, and this really is kind of out of date. We really should kind of update this in today's dollars, and the scope changed on whatever it is that we were doing. We're seeing quite a bit of that right now.
All right, now you are a company that does this. Are there a lot of other companies that do this in case you want to go out for an RFP?
Yeah, there are other companies that do this work in addition to us. So if you go out for RFPs, we'd be happy to submit a proposal, but I have no doubt that you'll get other responses in addition to us.
All right, so that's possible for us to do that, although we are used to working with you. Any other comments or questions on this? Mary Jo?
I do. If Karen can review for the public that might be watching the current impact fees that we collect, not the amounts, but the...
Yeah, so we currently, I actually know the amounts, so we currently collect for parks, $230 per new home.
Okay.
Water, if it's not exact, it's like $1,690, and sewer is $1,865, and that's it.
Hey, John, you heard those numbers. Do you have any idea where they sit as far as compared to other communities? I know this is throwing a question out of left field, but I just thought you might know.
Yeah, I'd say in general you're on the lower end.
Karen?
John, and Dave too, our city administrator asked departments to put together like wish lists of what they thought would qualify for impact fees, and some of the lists got a little they were a little overwhelming.
Sure.
So, and I know most of this has to do with facilities, like if you wanted to add on to your fire station or your police station or, parks is kind of obvious, but is there any kind of advice or what you should what we should tell managers that they should be looking at? Because like you said, vehicles don't count and they're putting all this stuff on the list and it doesn't even qualify. So do you have some kind of a document on what does qualify that you could send us?
I mean, I could, previous impact fee studies, I don't know that we have, well, we might have some general language, so I'd be happy to send something like that along to them.
Okay.
But
It might narrow down the list because I don't think they really understand what you can and can't use impact fees for as far as the managers, and I think it would be helpful.
Yeah, what I would say is, obviously number one, vehicles would be out. Number two, if it's a true replacement of a facility where we're not really expanding it, we're not, there really is, it's reached the end of its useful life. We're just replacing it in kind. Those types of facilities, generally, there's really not much growth benefit. I mean, growth obviously benefits from having a new building, but if it's just, we're replacing it with the same layouts and size, there's generally not a lot of growth-related benefit to it. The other thing would be, from a wish list standpoint, whatever, if you prioritize capital projects, my advice would be pick the projects that you really know are going to happen, versus the ones that are kind of the nice to haves, so that you're not having to come back and potentially reduce your impact fee years down the road because you put it in place for facilities that ultimately we knew wouldn't have a good likelihood of actually being constructed.
Okay, John, my next question is if we decided that we wanted to raise our impact fees, what is our step to do that? Do we have to come get a study going? How is that done?
Yeah, so you got to do the update the public facilities needs assessment. You have to, once that study is done, it gets put on file at the office of the clerk for that 30-day period. The ordinance itself would be updated, depending on what sort of updates we're doing to the different impact fees, just making sure that it has the most current, statutory language in it. And then you're going for a public hearing. And the public hearing would be at the, likely usually at the council level. And then after that hearing is concluded, it's usually the same evening, you're taking action on the ordinance itself.
Okay, but to do that, we need to get the actual study at the 5,000 for this and 5,000 for that. In order to just do that, we have to hire somebody to do that.
Correct.
Any other question, Mary Jo?
Yes. So if we were to update our park fee and the water fee and each of those is $5,000 to $7,000. So each.
Correct.
So if we wanted a stoplight, that's another $5,000. So each specific project,
Rich, John, she mentioned a stoplight. If we were doing traffic control, that would be a whole different study, not just one light, right?
Correct.
okay, well that's why I asked it. Okay, how does library fit into this?
Library is an eligible
Okay.
impact fee. There are many communities that have library impact fees. So certainly that's eligible. If you're talking about an expansion to a library, that's an eligible activity. A new library facility would certainly be eligible. There are a number of communities out there that have libraries.
Mm-hmm.
Go ahead.
All right, and then how do we capture, because we're a tourist destination and people are staying in residential areas now, but they're not counted as part of the population. So how do we account for that?
Yeah, that's a good question. That's something I think we have to give some thought to in terms of, you have a permanent population, you have a seasonal population.
Right.
I would imagine that your comprehensive plan kind of has some sort of projections with that. I think we'd have to if we were selected on this study, that's something that we'd have to talk through with city staff in terms of how we were going to do this. I mean, the bottom line is, the impact fee itself is paid at the issuance of the building permit. So you do have a high seasonal population, but they're not residents, they're not business owners where they're pulling the permit and being here for the long haul.
Yes, can I follow up on that one?
Yeah.
So it is possible to account for, it's possible to put that in the mix to some extent. Might be.
Yeah, I don't know for sure that it really would be. I mean, you have to take that into consideration in terms of, I'm guessing, the facility design and what you're doing. But
Well, like a park, for instance.
right, but it, from a park perspective, we're typically looking at, we have 10,000 residents now. Between now and 2030, let's see, 2050, 2040, we're going to go from 10,000 to 20,000. We're looking at, that 10,000 incremental population growth as our denominator for impact fees. I think it's harder to come back and say seasonally we're expecting a huge boom. Again, they're not residents who are pulling a building permit and actually paying the impact fee.
Dave, are you there? Did you want to say something?
Yeah, Jonathan, this is Dave Nord. Just a quick question about the RFP itself. I mean, every department has their opinion about what they would like to see versus what state law will have to say about that matter. As part of the RFP, can we ask the consultant to go through with department heads or city staff and just say, this is going to be part of the RFP, is going through each division and say, yeah, this is eligible, no, this isn't, and really guide us so that we're not sending out an RFP with, we want everything.
Yes.
we want it identified.
Yep. No, I think that's a really good idea, and we've seen that in other places where when we've got involved with an impact fee study, we have first sat down and done exactly what you said, which is gone through the different facilities with department heads and said, this really is not a candidate, this one is, so that we really have a good narrowed list at the time, we're getting the impact fee study underway to say, these are we're doing sewer, water, parks, etc., library, whatever it is, and this is the actual facilities that we're basing the impact fee on.
Excellent, thank you. My only concern is I know who's probably going to end up writing this RFP if it happens, and I just want to make sure it is concise in what it's trying to accomplish. Thank you.
Anybody else here have a question? Mary Jo?
Just one more quick, hopefully, request. If Lana can send out these slides that were presented to the rest of the council so we can actually read the information. Thank you.
Yep, no problem.
All right, well, what we need to decide here is what we're going to do on this item. I would think the next step for us would be to direct the council to prepare to ask for an RFP.
Actually, that might be redundant. Actually, not might, it is. Because on July 6th, I pulled the minutes. There's a motion to draft and send out a request for proposal for the impact fee study. It was seconded by. So it's already on. I mean, we can take another motion, but we already passed one July 6th.
Go to where? To come to us? Or go to the
No, we passed it at FLR.
FLR. Rich?
Well, we already passed the motion, so I think it makes sense that we send it to the council. And what I heard him say was that as part of the RFP, whoever gets hired can sit and narrow it down too. So we don't have to have it narrowed down before we hire the company, which to me makes sense. They already have the wish list, so let's let somebody professional come in and help us narrow it down.
Now, this is Haley. All right, so I'm looking to see where we want to go from here.
Yes, I can. Motion by Fesenmeyer to draft and send out a request for proposal for an all-encompassing impact fee study. Second by Headland. And then we talked about a retro date, but it carried unanimously. But I'll make a motion to reaffirm our July 6th motion to go up for RFP.
I'll make your chairman happy. I will second it.
Okay. And all that does is send it to the council for sure. So hopefully we can put that.
Any discussion? All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Okay. Jonathan, I thank you very much. You'll probably be hearing from us again.
Sounds good. My pleasure. Have a good night.
Item 7,